You're listening to the Transform Your Life from the Inside Out podcast. This episode is a continuation of the last one, and it's titled Conversations with a Sorcerer, Your Addictions, Part 2. Now, in the last episode, by the way, if you've not listened to the last episode, the one prior to this, go back and listen to that one, because this one is a continuation. And in this one here, I want to dig a little further into addictions and how Don Xavier manages that concept and how he explained it to me and those that worked with him many years ago. I will also explain in this episode briefly how it affects us in sleep time and how it affects the body. So let's continue with the conversation about addictions. Keep listening.
Hi, I'm Jim Fortin, and you're about to start transforming your life from the inside out with this podcast. I'm widely considered the leader in subconscious transformation, and I've coached super achievers all around the world for over 25 years. Here, you're going to find no rah-rah motivation and no hype, because this podcast is a combination of brain science, transformational psychology, and ancient wisdom all rolled into one to take your life to levels you've never thought possible. If you're wanting a lot more in life, to feel better, to heal, to have peace of mind, to feel powerful and alive, and to bring more abundance and prosperity into your life, then this podcast is for you, because you're going to start learning how to master your mind and evolve your consciousness. And when you do that, anything you want then becomes possible for you. I'm glad you're here.
Okay, so talking more about addictions. And by the way, I just noticed that this is episode number, I do believe, and I could be wrong. I'm often wrong about trivial things like this, but I believe this is episode number 333. If not, it's 332, but I think that was last week. This is episode 333. And 333 is 9. And Tesla said, if you want to understand the universe, understand 3, 6, and 9. I'll leave that and just let you look into that with your own curiosity. But Don Xavier also does everything by 3s and 6s and 9s. Okay, so what I want to talk about in this episode is more about addictions. And I want to go back to the last episode and mention something that I did say. Basically, I said, what, are you fucking crazy? And that's exactly what I said. But it was more for effect than anything else. And I picked it up many years ago from a friend of mine who used to say things like, what, you smoking crack? He used to say that a lot. It was meant very jovially, and it wasn't meant in any kind of way offensively or to be terse. So in the event I came across that way, I just want to share that if I could take it back, I'd do it a little differently. Anyway, people who are addicted, let me continue here with my notes from that conversation with Don Xavier about addiction. People who are addicted, many times they are into destructive addictions. What we don't recognize is that all humans, we get into addictions. Some are positive addictions, some are negative addictions, and many of us only identify with the negative addictions. But he said the person is in the process of changing, and then that person continues the addiction that destroys the renewing process. What he meant by that is that we're always growing and evolving. The body is always changing and it's always healing itself. But many times when we're into negative, especially chemical addictions, even though the body is in the process of healing and renewing itself every, I believe he said 7 months, what happens is we actually stay in the addiction and destroy the renewing process. And he said, we won't, we hold it and we won't let it go. And then many times we are into addictions, which are more mental addictions that we don't classify as addictions, but we don't even know that we are in addictions. When we're in physical addictions, yes, we know that, whether it be heroin or, cocaine or I don't know the drugs. So I don't know what all the drugs are. Anyway, but many of us get into mental addictions, and a workaholic, that could be a mental addiction. A person that's angry all the time, or quite often, that could be an addiction. A person that's in self-pity, quite often that could be an addiction. But we don't actually classify and we don't recognize it as an addiction. Then he said, when you know yourself, you are capable to know when you are in an addiction. And what he said is we cannot choose the addictions that take us backwards. So think about things in your life that you do, and you do it over and over and over again, and you may call it a habit, but for the purpose of this podcast, these episodes, they're also addictions, because we go into the addiction, and it can be, again, everything from chemical or food or physiological to mental, fear, anger, worry. And I'll talk about that in just a minute in this episode. But we cannot allow ourselves to choose addictions that take us backwards and hurt ourselves. I remember one time he and I were talking, and he said that many of us, we use our own intelligence. I don't mean book smart intelligence. I mean the intelligence of our divinity, the intelligence of our knowing. We have infinite intelligence inside of us. All of us do, but we have all explored it. We experience it at different levels of awareness. And we all have universal consciousness, which is, I don't even know the right word for it, other than maybe extreme universal intelligence in us. And we have this intelligence in us, and we're intelligent beings, relatively speaking. And that's very relatively speaking, because the species overall is not a very evolved species. But many people listening to these podcasts, my podcast in particular, or similar ones, we have either woken up or we are waking up, and we know that there's more to the human experience other than just living in a bag and the container and a body of skin. We know there is more. And I get a good chuckle, not in a judgmental way, but kind of like, okay, when people tear me down on YouTube, they'll watch the videos or the clips or whatever, and they tear me down based upon, sharing topics like this. And it's interesting in that it's not that they're bad people at all, however you define that. It's simply a matter of awareness. But many times what Don Javier was saying is we cannot, and we'll talk about that a lot in this episode, we cannot allow ourselves to choose the addictions that take us backwards, addictions that impede or slow down our evolution, especially at this time on the planet, because the entire species is evolving very, very quickly. And he said, I'll quote him here, with bad addictions, we go against our own self. And he said, an awakening needs to happen, an awareness of self, an awareness of your power. I'm adding that last part, an awareness of your power, but an awareness of yourself needs to happen. And with awakening and awareness, we realize that we have to create change as we are also in the process of changing. So what we have to recognize is that the body, the physiology, is in the process of changing, and it's a positive process. We also have to actually correspond that with a mental process of changing. So, and a changing of awareness and consciousness. So we have the physical and the non-physical part of ourselves, both simultaneously in the process of changing ourselves and evolving and growing ourselves. Since day one and for many decades, he's talked about dream time and what dream time is and what it's not and what we humans think it is and etc. This is not an episode to go into that, but I want to share, as it applies to addictions, he said that, we often go to bed, and he asked the question of those of us that work with him, because he usually speaks in a group. What addictions are you taking with you to bed? What addictions are you waking up with? Now, we know that it's not a physiological or a chemical addiction we're taking to bed. I mean, as best I know, no one is drinking a bottle of wine while their physical body is asleep. But think about what mental addictions are you taking to bed with you? And he was talking about, again, he jumps around a lot, and I'm trying to do my best to make it cogent because when he jumps around, he could be talking to us for 5 hours, literally. And then he'll jump here, jump there, jump here, jump there, and then he weaves it all together at the end. And in listening to former recordings with him, I'm trying to take these vast recordings and chunk them down into little 30-minute segments. That in itself can be a beast. Anyway, addictions can be good. And he was telling us, have addictions that are good addictions. Have addictions that help you. So that being said, what addictions do you think help you get where you want to go in life? What addictions do you think help you be what you want to be in life? And what addictions basically give you what you want to have in life? It's really important to look at that. And I'll talk more about addictions and how he breaks it down a little later in this episode. But he talks about we go to bed many times, and we go to bed. Let's say the person is, air quote, a worrier. Then they go to bed and they are worrying and worrying and worrying in bed, not recognizing that they are in the addiction of worrying because they worry constantly. Then they take that addiction to bed with them. Then he skipped around here a little bit and he said the way that he lives this in his own life is like you've got two cards in your hand, playing cards metaphorically. I've got two cards. One is a card of well-being and it assists my well-being. And the other card is a card of destruction. And the question is, which card do we choose? Now, for anyone that listens to some scientific podcast, I go there as well, even though he didn't talk about that in this talk, and there's a reason for that. The reason he doesn't talk about, he talks constantly about physics and mathematics and geometry. But the reason that he doesn't talk about science often relative to the brain or the physical body is because everything is mind and everything corresponds not to individual mind, but divine mind. So speaking of physical body, addiction can be and is a physiological addiction, but any addiction can be brain-based. But as I was just saying, mind rules the body. And I've mentioned before an example of the Vietnam War when the Pentagon was worried that a lot of soldiers were addicted to heroin. I'll talk about that in just a little bit. So he said, many people go to bed, but they don't go to bed. They go into their addiction of worry, anger, hate, resentment. They go into the vortex of negative energy, which is toxic for us. And then what we do, in the vein that I was saying this, we take the addiction to bed with us. We go to bed with negative addictions, and his words, because I want to be as accurate as I can, is they're like a virus to us. Ponder that for a moment. When you go to bed with these addictions of worry and fear and anger and hate and pity and shame and all these kind of things, they're like a virus that feed on us. And then many of us, we wake up with the very same addictions. And then the way the brain works, we become more addicted to making the choice of entertaining the virus, the addiction. So to synopsize that very simply, many times we go to bed with worry. And then what do? First thing, boing, our eyes open up in the morning And then we go back into worry, 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 worry. And then we worry all day. And then we go to bed with worry, worry. And I'm not tossing any stones. I'm not at that place in my life. And I am no better, no different than anyone else. I'm just at a different vantage point than a lot of people. Having my experience in 30 years with a shaman and a lot of my training, which was quite rigorous many, many times and very challenging. I'm no better, no worse. Everything I'm talking about, I have been there before. And everyone that he works with personally, we've all been there, because if we had not been there, he would not have had or be having these conversations with us. So, if substances, I mentioned Vietnam a couple of minutes ago. Back during the Vietnam War, so when I mention worry, that's a mental, but it also becomes brain-based because it creates neural pathways in the brain. But Vietnam, chemical. The Pentagon was worried back in the 60s that heroin was at such epidemic levels with U.S. troops. The Pentagon was worried that a huge amount of troops were going to come back from Vietnam addicted to heroin. And what they found, pretty shockingly, is that many soldiers, troops that were addicted to heroin in Vietnam were not addicted when they came back to the United States. Why? And there's been some research on that. Environment. Environment can play a huge role in our addictions. And so, using my words and no one else's, these soldiers in Vietnam, what they were doing is they were using the heroin as an escape mechanism because of the environment that they were in. And that environment pretty much locked the brain, turned the brain on and into fight or flight response. The brain's on constant alert for danger, which is what your subconscious mind is doing right now. And your brain, even though that you don't know it, your brain is constantly scanning your environment right now, even though you may be sitting at your home, in your home or wherever. Your brain is scanning your environment looking for danger because the reptilian part of the brain, one of its biggest roles is to keep you, if not predominant role, is to keep you safe and keep you alive. So he was talking about Vietnam, but let's bring that to the here and now. So many people with addictions, and I see this a lot in TCP, we're not licensed addiction therapists. We don't prescribe anything. We don't tell people how to heal anything. But I watch people heal a lot of things around addictions, especially alcohol and cigarettes and habits like that, because they've healed themselves on the inside in our time together in the transformational coaching program, which is a 13-week immersion. And the reason I have it as an immersion and for that long is because we rehabituate the brain to teach people new habits that actually serve them. So he says that many times when people come out of an addiction, what they do is they will use an excuse to go back into an addiction. They will say things like, oh, this happened, that happened in my life, and I'm out of rehab, but these things happen. And then I use these external things as an excuse to go back into an addiction. So I'd mentioned here also the word control. I'd mentioned it last episode, I believe, and I want to touch on it here for a second as I keep going. I learned a lot of years ago, not from Don Xavier, but coaches of mine, that control is an illusion. We control nothing in life. And a phrase that I love is when we try to control things, we are controlled by the illusion of control. So when you look at life, we control very little. But I have done an episode on this a while back, I think somewhere along the lines, and Don Xavier constantly talks about this, the word choice. But he substitutes and uses the word control, so I want to stick with that word. So what we have to do, he said, if we lose control with some things in our life, we have to learn to make better choices to not let those things control us. Actually, the way that I explain that feels pretty good to me. We need to make better choices to not let things control us. Now, anyone that might have a physical addiction will say, Jim, that's a bunch of bullshit because I've been, addicted to heroin or whatever. Well, what I know is many times the brain is driving the addiction. This is neuroscience. And so then we think we have conscious choice, or we think we don't have choice. But you know what? We do have choice because the mind can override the brain and the neural pathways in the brain. And if people didn't have choices, these hundreds of thousands of troops that came back from Vietnam would have no choice but to stay into the addiction of heroin. But what they did is they actually exercised their choice to actually stop letting heroin control them. So to go on here with his words, quote, "Whatever is taking control of me is out of my life since day one." And I wrote that down verbatim. He said, "Whatever is taking control of me is out of my life since day one." And he goes on to say, "If I find myself losing control in me," meaning when he says in me, meaning his thoughts and his behaviors, it has to go. I have to control my own addictions. Think about that. I have to control my own addictions. Now, remember, when I started this episode, I said everyone has addictions. We have helpful and we have non-helpful addictions. We have what many of us call good and bad addictions. I call them helpful and non-helpful, but I say good and bad for distinction and clarity for you guys. But he says we have to choose good addictions. We have to choose addictions that are going to benefit us instead of harming us. But many of us, what we do out of our negativity and emotions, our fear in particular, many times we choose addictions that harm us. We create neural pathways in the brain, which reinforces the addiction. Then we think we have no choice. And we actually may be challenged with the neurology of it, but we always have choice. We have power of mind, and mind is more powerful than the brain because the brain is organic and mind is universal. Scientists cannot find the mind. Mind is consciousness. So we have to use the mind to control the brain. Okay, I want to segue from the episode for just one moment, and I want to ask you, where were you most stuck in 2023? What things held you back the most? When I ask people, why they're not getting what they want in life, people often say, well, I was stuck with X, Y, Z. Or, and this may resonate with you, I feel stuck. If you're feeling stuck, one question I want you to ask yourself is, what is it costing me? What is it costing me to not resolve this and to battle being stuck? And when you add that up, whether it's money and especially in business, but in your health and your relationships, when you add that up, it's extremely costly to be stuck in life. Now, all this being said, I created a new challenge. I created it last year. Many thousands of people have gone through it, and it's called the Get Unstuck Challenge. Interesting, the name's all about getting unstuck. Now, in this challenge, it's a 9-day challenge, and I walk you through at a very profound, at a very spiritual, level, and even at a cosmic level. I walk you through who and how you're being as a being, meaning your presence on the planet. And when you understand that, when you understand the nature of you at a very deep level, now you might have heard me say be to have before, and that's more about 3D reality. Who do you have to be so you can do, so you can have? But I'm talking, what does it mean to be? And then what is that power associated with that? When you understand that, you automatically get unstuck in life. This program, never offered it before to you guys. We're offering it now. I don't think we've offered it to the podcast and an ad. Maybe we have, maybe we have. I don't remember. Anyway, it doesn't matter because we haven't offered it a lot if we have. But we're offering the Get Unstuck Challenge again. It's only $97. Thousands of people have been through it and they rave about the results they're getting. And I know that you will do the same thing. So Again, ponder the question, what does it cost me? What am I giving up? What peace of mind? What happiness? What money? What relationships am I giving up in life because I am stuck in my own crap? Now, as you're thinking about that, click the link, go to tcp.jimfortin.com/unstuck. Again, and we'll drop the link in the show notes, tcp.jimfortin.com/unstuck. Download the program, you get started right away, and your life will start changing dramatically. When you apply what you're learning in that program, your life will start changing in very dramatic ways, very, very quickly. And as a matter of fact, in the next 9 days. Okay, back to the episode. And he says, and I know this, I've known him for 28 years. He says, I will have wine and I will have tequila. And I've seen that. But he has also said, when have you seen me out of control? And I have to say, in 28 years, not one time, and I'm not exaggerating, not one time have I seen him out of control. And being, as he would call himself, a normal human person, that's his phraseology. I'm a normal human person, whatever that means, but he means he's in the container, he's in the skin. Many years ago, he would drink coffee in the morning. And one day I was seeing him and I'm like, no coffee? And he's like, nope. Well, I'll tell you what he told me. It's like, they told me I couldn't have it anymore. And he stops, boom, like that. He doesn't fight himself. And I'll talk more about this in a moment. He doesn't fight himself. Boom, it's gone. Many years ago, I know he drinks a lot of green tea. And he used to like honey a lot. I know he liked honey a whole lot. And I told my sister one time, I'm like, is there any particular honey he's liking right now? I'm at this store and all they sell is honey. I want to buy him some honey. She's like, nope, he stopped honey, no honey. I remember many years ago, I would see him drink one glass, and not a lot, a little bit, of single malt liquor after doing some spiritual work, a ceremony. He stopped that as well. And I've noticed his congruence, that when he's led through guidance that he gets, that something has to go out of his life, he doesn't fight it. He doesn't argue it. He simply drops it and never looks back at it again. So when I look at him drinking wine, he likes red wine, and he'll always have a couple glasses of red wine at dinner when I see him, but I've never seen him in any way be physiologically affected by the wine, because he said, if I allowed those things to affect me, I could allow them to control me, and I choose not to allow them to control me. Now, for many, it may not be physiological addictions. It may not be chemical, meaning even alcohol or cigarettes or even drugs. But for many, it's psychological issues, fear for many, many people. And he says for him, it's not a matter of him. He's not going to compromise, which I'll talk more about. He's not going to compromise his physical power. He's not going to compromise it for the addictions of the physical body. And he said this to a lot of us over the years, that he said, when I go to bed, I don't allow stuff to make me addicted. Then I'd be affecting my own self, and then I'd go into stress, which can then become an addiction. Now, quote here, it's something he said that I think is very powerful. In dream time, my wholeness, meaning if he went to bed with stress or worry, he goes in dream time, meaning he said in dream time, my wholeness would go into stress. I continue holding all of my good addictions. So my vitality is stable. My vitals, meaning his internal vitals, are stable. My brain is getting better and healthier. This is how it works. It's an inertia. When we get better, we get better. When we get worse, we get worse. So if we're going to bed, worry, we're creating addictions. We're taking this with us into dream time. And then he affects the wholeness of our being, meaning he affects his ability to communicate at higher levels of cosmic consciousness with, just say, the entities that he does. I'm not going to go into it in this episode, but we all have that. And we don't want to affect ourselves going into dream time, because what you take to bed with you a few hours before bed is what you take to bed with you. For many, it's worry, relationship, health, and money. And then we marinate in that all night long. That affects our consciousness, and it affects us from getting the levels of communication that we need from higher mind and higher wisdom. So every one of us, when we go to bed at night, I'm segueing here, I'm going off basically what he was talking about. When we go to bed, we leave our bodies. I mean, we're not the physical body. So when we go to bed, we leave the physical body. But I'll put it in my words. If we take all of this 3D human physical worry, it's like lead weights that holds us down, that then impedes our ability to gather information from dream time, higher awareness, higher knowing, higher consciousness. So he was saying, I know myself. I have two cards, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. And he said, I have two cards just like everyone else. One is serving me in a terrible way. One is serving me in an amazing way. So which choice do I need to make? And he said something next that I think is quite profound. He said, for me, it's not even a question of which choice I will make. I'll say that again. For me, it's not even a question of which choice I will make. Now, what I request you to notice here is he makes, even though he has choice, he makes it not a choice. This is what I've taught people in some of my programs. This is what I call an unbreakable standard. An unbreakable standard is that you have this standard that you will not violate under any circumstances. I was talking to a friend a couple of days ago, and she's not touched any alcohol in 15 years. And she told me she used to be addicted to alcohol and drugs. And she goes, I have not touched any chemical in 15 years. She goes, I won't allow myself to do it. That's an unbreakable standard. But where many of us go in terms of physical chemical addiction is we keep our attention in the addiction. And then we make choices and it's partly brain-based. We have to recondition the brain. We think we have no choice to have the alcohol or the heroin or the X or the drug or whatever it is, or the cigarette. We do have a choice, but we're in the habit, and we have to use our mind and our, not willpower, our will. Our will is our life force to make different choices. Two cards in the hand. We have to make the choice that further supports the totality of us and our spiritual missions, or why we came to the planet. Okay? And then he said that because he's in a human body, he often says he's a human person, he actually does have addictions, but he uses his addictions to propel his service. He's all about spiritual service, and he has been since the day I've met him. So he uses his addictions to become even more powerful, good addictions. And then he uses these good addictions to help him serve more people. And for him, that's the evolution of himself. So there's not so much of a transformational takeaway in this episode, but I want to leave this with you, is that your transformational takeaway can be this. You always have choice, even when you think you don't have choice. Even when you are in your addictions, you have choice, but you actually have to make that choice and make it an unbreakable standard. And that unbreakable standard is that no matter what, I'm using my will, not my willpower, but I'm using my will to live by this unbreakable standard. No cigarettes, no coffee, no sugar, whatever, and anger, whatever it might be for you. And we'll talk more about that in the next episode. But you, please listen very closely. You have that power. And if you think you don't, you're making the choice not to actually exercise the universal intelligence within you, because you have that power. And we have to start making choices that support us and build us, not choices that keep us grounded in the physical experience and our lack of knowing and our lack of awareness. Okay, so we'll pick up next week. We'll continue with this series. There'll be one more, maybe two more episodes on addictions. And hopefully as you're listening to these and you go through them, you can start putting these together in your own mind to start making better choices, which next time I'll talk about picking addictions that are good addictions and how to actually start making those your go-to choices for what you want to create in life. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you over on another episode. Bye-bye.